now this is going to the 90s, so dealing with reinforcement. We're talking about the ideal society when we start using, let's say, money as a reinforcement element. You were saying it doesn't mean we stop reinforcing people.
No, it does.
What would be some other legitimate reinforcement things? Let's say for someone who's just a perpetual workaholic and they enjoy it, they're not being forced to, and they're really doing such a service to the society, and the society wants to express their gratitude in some way. How would they do it as an alternative to using money as they're doing now? But I was asked this by other people, and I didn't know. I didn't want to commit myself. That's all my
Well, I'm trying to think of the question and the answer, and whether or not it would be an answer in their terms. But I'll give you the answer. We don't want any people who work for reinforcement of society. We want people to work for reinforcement in terms of what they get out of it. In other words, I like an artist to paint because they like to paint. Just that simple. But when an artist paints to please a lot of people, he's going to be very unhappy. If you like to get up early in the morning and fly a plane and roll through the clouds just because you like it, and when you do it at an air show to try to amuse those assholes, if it falls apart in the air and crashes, they say you should have been. You know, they really don't care. And I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in people saying, well, society doesn't have to tell you that you're doing all right if you know you're doing all right. That's all I'm trying to get across. If you like your lifestyle, if you love walking through the woods, and when you come out of the forest, people will go and pin a medal on you because you walk through the woods. And you walk through the woods because you want people to pin a medal on you. That's the wrong answer. You go and sit at the seashore because you like to watch the great freight. Talking about that kind of thing. Or you listen to music because you enjoy music, certain kinds of music that you enjoy. You sit there and listen to it. But if you go because it's good taste to appear at the ballet, it's good taste to appear at the concert, you know what I mean? It's culture. This is the bullshit. This is the wrong thing. So all I'm saying is the question that they ask is not a valid question. And the answer is not whether society reinforces you, then you're a monkey. But I'm saying that you could gain reinforcement by genuine growth within yourself. You know what I mean? That you feel it when you're doing something, when you're making plants grow, whatever it is that you want to do. No one has to tell you you're making plants grow. Well, you can see that. You don't have to encourage people. Of course, there are certain types of people that need encouragement, so you encourage them until you can cut those strings. You know how well you operate a lathe, Richard. You know when it vibrates and the chips are too big. I mean, you can see that the adjustments are there. They're self-operating. And you can see when you handle watercolor, airbrush, and it doesn't work. When you gain control of it, it works. And if someone criticizes your work, they may criticize either color, lack of color correctness, or the ellipse is too shallow or too compressed, But people will tend to feel their own growth in the future and make contact with other people because it enhances the mutual growth of everyone around. Don't want people to work for the old incentives. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if that'll answer for that.
No, I modify it.
Guy says, I like putting shoes on horses. Fine, I won't be needing this guy. Okay. Anything anybody else want to discuss tonight? Anything you want to get into?
I just read through the thing here, and you're talking about the liquids.
Yeah.
And there's something you say here about making available hundreds of additional acres of land for what are you talking about doing?
No, it's over on the west coast of Florida, near Naples.
So what were you talking about, buying up the city around?
Oh, no. See, first thing that's done is you look in that corner there, a planning center. You know what that means? Blueprints, printing presses, photographic equipment, and the planning of that environment. And then after it attains that stage, you invite other people in, and then there's articles written about it after it's built. And then you get inquiry. Then you start your second project. Then you invite people from other countries down, and they in turn tell it to other people. Then we try to build one in Panama, one in Cuba, one in Venezuela, one in Mexico. The system is the same. And we can travel, we're sort of citizens of the world, you know what I mean? We don't have any particular ideas except to better the environment that we're in. And so the idea is it'll spread if society is ready for that kind of structure. If the situation recognizes the need for that kind of thing, you see? And if not, you have a self-contained planning environment. Youth, as they say, is most youth today has no direction. The directions are shallow and short-term. They don't have big directions because they're hard to handle. Their personal lives are under a lot of pressure. It's very hard to think in terms of social ideas. Once we get our system built, there's going to be a lot of people coming with suitcases that want to get in. And there's not going to be a fucking chance. Now is the time, before it's up altogether. You see? And we know the Sunshine Patriots. You know what they are? Okay. They come around after it's built. And there's a certain time of action. It doesn't make any difference to me how many years a person's been going to sessions. It's what they do. That's all. It's the only measure of man, their action. They could have read every book by Loeb, wrote down notes and everything else, but no action pattern, dead. A stranger coming in taking on an action pattern is more socially mechanistic than any other system. Now that's it. And it's that simple. It isn't complicated. So you get your first system built, and then you build a second system, which is a considerable improvement over the first. Members of the first move to the second system, and the newcomers come into this system. But when you become a lodge, an enlarged system, they go to an environment where they're given an orientation in nature, the interrelationships of plants and animal life and rain and lightning, and they're given the fundamentals of scientific environmental studies in that area. They're also given introduction to behavioral sciences. They take a course. Then they move into the first experimental city on trial for a certain period of time, several months. See how they relate, see how they work out, whether they are loners. Some people are loners, some people like to live in groups. A loner ought to be provided for and live in a little house in the community on the outskirts because they don't work in groups too well. Now, Joe might say, well, let's get to that goddamn loner and make him cooperative and live with a group. The things that most of us forget is this society, I hope you remember this stuff, but you got your tape recorders running, because what I'm going to say now is very significant. Let's take Dawn, for example. What I'm saying about Dawn isn't true, it's just an example, okay? It has no relation to Dawn. Let's say that Dawn is very creative in electronics. He can do a hell of a lot for the community. But temperamentally, he likes to sit up and play the piano for 3-4 hours. This is what he likes. He doesn't like mingling. And the uniqueness of his character in developing projects alone over the years, he is not a mingler. His character had been developed uniquely that way, and that's why he stays with an electronics problem. He'll stay with it until it's finished, you see? And then there's some people that are easygoing and the thing doesn't work. Well, I'll get to it Saturday, and they light a cigar and they go home, see? So we don't want to get everybody to fit into the communal activity. I recognize that the greatest thing a person can have is what the old words were, the expression and carrying out their own individual lights. And by that I mean that a person that has devotion to a social cause must of necessity have some kind of idealistic purity still left in them. They are so naive that a guy can sell them a life insurance that isn't worth a shit. You know what I mean? And it's that purity, it is just that purity that makes that person that devoted to that thing. You see? So when you walk over to a guy and you say, I just bought these 4 tires, and the guy charged me $100 for it, and I said, well, you're a sucker, they're no good, they're worn out. And they haven't learned about these current people. They haven't learned those things. So in order to keep your environment comprised of fairly good people, you can't take people that are devoted to their work and toughen them up to the world. As soon as a guy is going to come along, he's going to clip you, so you've got to watch out. Well, everybody in the community walking around waiting to be clipped by somebody else. And those qualities that make up what you call a good person is a certain degree of naivety, a certain degree of purity. I wonder if you know what I'm talking about. These are essential qualities that you can be hardcore with the old system. When you get into this environment, there has to be this conditioned concept of idealism. Idealism meaning that you work because you like it, that you're in the environment because you want to make it work, that I'm not depending on him to make it work, or her to make it work, or him to make it work. I'm working on it because I'd like to see it work. And she's going to work on it because she likes to see it work. And he's going to do what he can do because he likes to see it work. But I don't have to walk over. Don will go over and make sure that the electrical aspects of the community are operating well, and he will check the water and the generating systems. He doesn't have to be told to do that. You know what I mean? Because people don't have to be told what to do if the community serves the interests of those people. And if a community is unfulfilling, if a person's been conditioned to go to nightclubs at night, bars, and shoot at that, and they're quite good at what they do, let's assume that you can grow more fish than anybody in the community. You can make more snails go and edible plants than anybody can. And she gets it, she's got to go to a bar downtown, likes to hear jokes, likes to do that. She's not thrown out of the community. This system creates all manner of human deviation. And because their behavior deviates, because they're not all singing community songs in a circle, because the environment has affected them differently, that is a very hard form of reality we eventually must learn to recognize. Now, he may be working real hard in the community, doing very useful things, but on Sunday he sneaks out of the community and goes to church because he hasn't been able to let go of that. It's very important to him. Somehow he feels that this whole community plan is part of the divine plan, and he can't quite let go. Now, I can throw him out, but he's still devoted to the community. He still believes in it. And he said, what the hell are you trying to do? I says, I don't direct your telescope. I'm not bringing my Bibles into your community. I'm going out. And he must be permitted to do so. Now, if he walks over and he starts talking to Richard about God, and then Richard starts going to church, he's not going to be thrown out of the community. But when he joins the American Nazi Party, when he joins things that are socially detrimental, that hurt people, when the guy says, let's get rid of all the goddamn foreigners, when he joins organizations that are antisocial, then the person is asked to leave the community, or you meet with them and talk with them and ask them what their new persuasion is. How is it that they feel that way about foreigners or Blondes or Swedes or whatever, and you try to arrest them from that direction that they're going in by direct conversation or direct confrontation. Also, another thing that has to be remembered in development of a new community, there are certain types of people that have another type of conditioning which they feel terribly guilty about. There are, amongst what they call, I'm using old language because some of you are new here, what they call the gifted people, have patterns in which they work real hard for 2 months. They've worked their ass off. Then they've got to knock off for 4 days, do nothing but walk along the beach, kicking a tin can. They need the randomness to get the perspective. And there are some people that work every day but not very productive. You know what I mean? So someday you might come in to a project and then you might go off for 2 or 3 days because that's your time. You understand? The recognition that a person come in and work their own lifestyle into the system, that recognition prevents the community from degenerating, collapsing. That's a very hard thing to understand, that Einstein used to like to play on his fiddle. It wasn't violent. It's very important for him. And I think if he's doing some kind of mathematical problem, and I say, well, what the hell's a fiddle? It has no significance. As long as he plays on that fiddle, when he comes back and looks at that, it looks different to him, because he's taken attention away. So I think it's a good idea to walk along the beach and kick pebbles. Now, if he says, Fresco, what's the function of just kicking a pebble or chucking a pebble in the water? It's a distraction. You're working on what you call the input and output related to an environment. When you're working on a project, you don't kick pebbles. It's too hard. You're riding direct paths, solving problems. But randomly walking around just tossing your keychain around and watching a chipmunk on a tree, you know, whatever you do. That random input is a relaxation from a hard training. So if some people in the community didn't work for 4 days, I know some people do it. They'll work till 4 in the morning, till the dead time, collapse in bed. You see? But that's their style. They got to get the job out, then they can go out and do something else. So when people go out, and everybody really looks at them when they're coming in 3 days, trying to get back to them. It's like the old world. So you have to be flexible enough to recognize that specifically talented people, I'm using old language because some people are new here. Like I said many times, Steinmetz smoked a stinking cigar and said no smoking except Steinmetz, because they wanted him in the plant. Now, I don't like stinking cigars, and some people don't like stinking pipes that I smoke. But the idea is a recognition of the difference. But if I bring my pipe into the community concert hall, there better be a glass area for smokers, you know what I mean? So that my interest in smoking is only polluting my own lungs and other smokers, and there must be glass sections. And if you want to bring your 3 crying babies to the movie theater at night, there's a double glass silent room. Your babies can scream their ass off, but they don't affect people in the movie theater. You understand what I mean? Until the environment. Now, if Richard wants to play his piano at 3 in the morning or 5 in the morning, the building must be specified to be acoustically designed, and if Richard decided to shove a stick of dynamite up his ass and blow his ass, we wouldn't know it next door. You've got to avoid noise pollution. You understand what I mean? And noise pollution is anything that annoys people. And so what we have to do is keep the environment relatively quiet. But don't try to impose a pattern on everybody. Think everybody ought to be out in the field by 4 o'clock. Then you build a system where, geez, I should have gone out there, the whole group would be down on me and against me and all that. And then you develop all the old guilts. Because idealists, who are just trained in idealism, don't realize that sometimes many very great people, I used to turn my great know about Einstein and Mark Twain, they had their own idiosyncrasies and strange patterns when they're not productive for 2 months. And then you become productive. Now, the recognition of that, which is a very hard thing for normal people, because they don't see anybody out there digging a ditch. You know, as long as I see that I'm digging a ditch and I like it, and if he wants to dig, he digs. If he doesn't want to dig, he doesn't dig. But he is productive in some areas, and it's the recognition of those differences that make it possible for a community to work well. Now, Joe, this isn't true what I'm saying about Joe. Joe says, I picked 3 bushels of string beans, and Harry only 1. But Harry made it possible for all these plants to grow and become 10 times as productive. You know what I mean? They don't come up with it with a bunch of string beans. You can't measure, and you can't turn around and say that everyone will devote equal effort to the community. That's not possible. Because you might be able to think of ways of growing beans 90 times the size. How is everybody else going to devote equal effort? You just devote whatever effort you can. But stop looking for that equal productivity. Productivity, yes, but not equal. And not on a schedule. A general schedule, as near as you can in terms of your emotions and nervous system. You know what that means? You have a nervous breakdown when people believe that you ought to do something at a given time. You commit a community, everybody in that community is looking at you walking through the hall. And then you say, I'm going to get out of this goddamn community. So I think that people that come in probably identify with it, and if they don't feel well, let's assume, let's take, this is also untrue, let's say Rosie is married in the community, she's very happy, but her husband falls in love with the caretaker of the museum, see? And he leaves the community and goes off for a while. Now Rosalie doesn't appear in the planning area for 2 or 3 days. And then she doesn't go around saying, well, my husband ran off. People who that have to answer to other people. The reason I didn't appear is because my brother-in-law got run over by a Mack truck. If I don't appear, and I want to tell you that my brother-in-law got run over, that's my affair. But if I don't appear, you've got to leave it, let people alone. Don't make them feel that they come in and they say, well, this is my income, I had a flat tire, I was a little bit on the road, they charged me $9. And everybody feels guilty as hell coming in, giving an account for why they didn't show up. That's a concentration camp. Where were you at 4:15? If the intentions of the person are to do the best job they can do, I don't ask you to forgive anybody, because nobody is in that position to forgive anybody, because everybody is fucked up and needs forgiveness. But what you have to learn to do is stop forgiving people and stop judging them. If they feel they want to work in the community, good. If they're non-productive in the community, you surpass that system, go on, and develop another way to go on with the job. Instead of hacking away at people that are not too productive, you either release them to the community, ask them if they want to leave, and they leave, and new people come in. But what we can hope to attain in the future is just not to bother people's ass. Let them be. That's all. That would be the basis for the survival of the community. No matter how much money you can make, no matter how well it runs, when you start putting things upon people, I thought you were going to fix the leaking window. You know what I mean? You understand what I mean? Yes.
That's what hung up with me the concept of guilt, who did more than
Yeah, that's right. Well, there's a book called 125 Utopias and Why They Fail. I read that, I think, when I was about 14 years old. Now, I started out with the ideal concept of community, and they always fail for the same reasons. That somebody feels they're more productive than somebody else. And it's true, some people are more productive than other people. So what? It's good.
It's a funny thing, because it's starting to avoid conformity and only get start.
Well, it's very hard to be that liberal. You know about being liberal. To be liberal in your point of view. What I was saying about Rosalie isn't true. Well, I just use people for those examples. But if a person doesn't feel up to it, if they have to answer to the community as to why they don't feel up to it, then, but sometimes they'll let you know. They say, I can't get that publication out in about 3 or 4 days due to personal reasons. Then we'll help. Is there anything I can do? And I said, no, okay. There are times when you're highly productive on your manuscript, I imagine. Then there are other times when you slam the book and go out. That may be due to, whatever the reasons are, that is your style. And there are prolific writers that write continuously, trash, mountains of it. And there are writers that write good stuff. They're very prolific, but they can't do anything else. They can't get along with people. But if you want somebody that's a prolific writer, you take the whole character. The naivety, the simplistic parts of their behavior, you know what I mean? Don't try to hammer them into line. The function of discussions like we're having here, question and answer period, is to wrestle with such ideas as this. And maybe come around saying, well, you think we can get everybody committed for 1 hour? And what happens is you start that kind of thing, and then you got a bunch of books, and then everybody is down there for what they didn't do or did do. And it depends on how rigid you want to be with the system. If you're too rigid, you can wreck it. If you're too lax, you can wreck it. You have to find some system, somewhere between the systems, where there are 3 or 4 people that can do each job just in case. Any questions about that?
One thing that occurred to me when you were discussing the person not being productive, asking to leave the community, the question of the word was, who's making this judgment to the person's productivity? Maybe one of these periods.
Yeah. Well, I think that when you put that way, it's a very important question. The one is called, who will make the decisions regarding anything in any community? And the best way to answer that question is possibly in terms of the real world where we live in. Let's assume that the 3 of us were going to fly to California, and you know how to fly a plane, and she knows how to navigate, and I'm a passenger. I don't think I can make any decisions for you. Your decisions are made largely by the weather, the performance of your airplane. You know what I mean? So the decisions are set for you. You don't really make decisions, you arrive at them by conditions. You know what I mean? Now, if I come into the navigator and say, what the hell are you doing this? And you say, well, do you know anything about navigating? No. Because when you're holding up the plane. Now, you make that decision, because that's clear. Now, here I got a factory and I turn out service cards for airplanes, see? Now, how many do I turn out? Who makes a decision? Nobody does in any plant. They get a call from Eastern Airlines. We want 76 ladders. What can you turn them out for? And I give them a price, 10,000 pieces, and we get 8,000 from another company, see? Also, finally, people call in, they tell this company what they want. Now, this company says, well, I'll give you a price in about 9 days. Now, what's that 9 days for? They call up Reynolds Aluminum, say, what do you sell us 100 tons of aluminum for? And then call up another company. How much will you charge for a stamping machine to punch holes? And after they get all that, they know what their overhead is, and they know what they need to earn in order to stay in business. So their decisions are forced by those things plus competition with competitors. See, in the old days, people used to go around thinking that government, a lot of government makes decisions. Governments that make decisions usually get in trouble. Governments that arrive at decisions. If you know that there's so many people here and the water supply is diminishing at a given rate, you know how many trucks you have to move in here to feed those people. Those decisions are arrived at. But the decisions I'm against are the ones that people sit back, light a cigar, and come up with a nothing opinion about something that is not based upon anything real. So in our community, we basically do not believe that anyone should have a right to their own opinion. We believe that everyone should have access to the facts. See, let's say you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and you're rowing the boat, because you like to watch the sunrise. And he says, you know, he's probably got a trap out there to catch all that. That's his opinion, and it's worthless. So we bring up kids not to have an opinion. So when you say to them, do you think this man can fly a glider 200 miles upside down? Kid says, I don't really know his abilities. I can't answer that. That's great. Once people learn to say that, this man thinks he can build a flying machine that'll fly 5 times the speed of sound with a new type engine. He said, it can never be done. He doesn't even know you. He never saw your blueprint. You know what I mean? So in the future, people will say, I can't answer that question. I don't know enough about it. Once you teach children to speak that way, you're eliminating the basis for many arguments. Yes.
I don't know if you have that much information. What about when the person comes back and says, what do you think your opinion is?
What?
What your opinion is? In other words, I guess they finish on the line.
A person wants an opinion?
No, when you said that the boy says, he says, what do you think of this flying? What have you? I fly this way. The boy says, I don't know. I haven't seen it flying airplane or what have you. Well, what do you think your opinion is? Any? What is your view? In other words, it's like
Well, I don't do that. You might do that. See, I don't walk over a person and say, I don't talk that way at all. I have no need for that kind of conversation. I won't walk over to a person and say, do you think that someday airplanes will fly to the moon? First, when you tell me that that person works on moon-flying systems or interplanetary studies, then you walk over and say, do you think that someday huge passenger ships will go to Mars and Venus? And the person that you're asking that has more reference to talk about. You know what I mean? In many instances. But don't go over and ask anyone anything. Because what they're after saying, they have no basis whatsoever for the reality that you seek. A man that studies animal behavior can probably tell you more, or a woman, than somebody who's a keeper of bees. You know what I mean? It doesn't work that way. But before you ask anybody anything, don't ask them for their opinion. Ask them whether they have any information in solid state physics, or whatever you want to know. Do you have any information on meteorology, about the weather? Do you have any information on soilless agriculture? The guy says, no, I don't. Then don't ask what he comes from. Do you have any information on high-speed transportation systems? He doesn't know. I don't even ask him a question. But you might go over and ask somebody a question. My mother can answer any question at all. She's always got, hey, anything you want to know. With those goddamn Greeks across the way, don't be running. See, my mother, she says, you want to know what's good for a kid? Don't ask my mother anything. Except, how do you feel? Great, terrific, I'm glad. So the idea is not to ask those questions. That's one thing that's hard for people to learn. They walk over to the president and say, is it really necessary to have war? Now, if the president was, would he say, hell no. There's a hell of a lot of money here, though. We sell arms all over the world. That really picks up our industry. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to order refrigerators from industry? But once a politician got up and he said, if I'm elected, this is in L.A., he says, I'll have the airplane factories turning out prefabricated houses rather than armaments. And everybody clapped. I asked him whether he owned any of those factories. He said, no. I said, are you able to give them orders for prefabricated houses? Do you have some financial holdings that permit you to do that? He said, no. Well, how the hell airplane factories don't turn out, or munition factories don't turn out munitions? Somebody comes over and says, we need 500 cannons, 54 machine guns at this price. And the aircraft factory turns them out. You can go into an aircraft factory tomorrow and say, I want 50 million lawnmowers, and they'll turn them out if you wanted them. Now, a lot of people seem to think the big munition factories work this way. They buy magazines called Americans, see? And the guys that do the work of that magazine called Americanism will get some pictures from the Soviet Union of a lot of guns lying up a mile, as far as the eye can see. And it's called I Love My Country, the first page of it. And then it shows new Soviet guns. Then in the back it says, is our armament program falling short? You know what I mean? So those industries like those magazines. They don't like articles in the Aviation Bulletin, say, the Lockheed Engineers Journal of Social Brand. And there it says that Russia spends so much on rockets and all that. That's good for the aircraft company. But if it said in a major article that the Russians are scrapping around and taking down their warheads and making milk-producing machines, well, they wouldn't put that in the Lockheed Journal. It doesn't serve their interest. And if you come back on a, say you got a Hawk in Texas, they're doing a lot of military industries and electronics and weapons and guns, a lot of industries in Texas. Now, if I'm a Texan, I go on a trip to China and Russia and Cuba and other countries, and I come back and, well, they're spending most of their money on social development. Oh, Christ, the industries of Texas would be terrified at that report. They depend on contracts for trouble in Latin America. They want to sell guns. And if they hear that there's a little communist group meeting here, and a socialist group meeting there, well, how many socialists are there? The guy says, I think there may be 50 socialists. Well, how many communists? It's complete 500, 600. That's the only right now. 500 or 600. Then he takes it to the CIA. And the CIA, he comes to the CIA versus they claim to be 8 communists. The CIA is not doing it. What I do is, I think that's a movie. The CIA becomes very, the same appropriation depends on how much bullshit you can bring in. You know, so you've got to understand that there's not a research organization anywhere in the world that doesn't alter its facts. When you're doing work on cancer or heart disease, there's a group that comes in and says, we gave your organization $10 million this year. What did you find? You're going to type a bunch of bullshit, you understand, in order to get the same appropriations next year. You understand that? So there's not a clean organization anywhere in the world. All nations think, from this point of view, all governments are corrupt. All airlines are corrupt. All systems of business and transaction, all jewelry stores, barbers, doctors, so long as the system exists as it does. And so you're not going to get any real information in this system until the system is organized toward world government, where we use the earth to benefit the lives of all people without any special privileged groups, but everyone living real well. I want to say that again. I mean, in the technical and scientific society, there is no need to have poverty. And there's no need to have just housing. You know, like if I went to Colombia, and I would build housing for the poor with gardens and terraces and tennis courts and art centers and music centers, not just adequate housing. I'm against that. I want libraries all over, good libraries at best. Until the system is organized toward world government, where we use the earth to benefit the lives of all people without any special privileged groups, but everyone living real well. I want to say that again. I mean, in the technical and scientific society, there is no need to have poverty. And there's no need to have just housing. You know, like if I went to Colombia, and I would build housing for the poor with gardens and terraces and tennis courts and art centers and music centers, not just adequate housing. I'm against that. I want libraries all over, good libraries the best. Why? Because the smarter your kids are, and his kids, the richer I am. You understand that? A nation that educates all its people is richer by far. I don't mean in business. Educates them in improving their agriculture, keeping their atmosphere clean, producing furniture, radio, electronics, you see. This is what makes a nation rich. So we don't believe in helping the people of the world for idealistic reasons. We think the world is better off if more people are better fed, more than adequate, and have good purchasing power. See, I don't know who you are, anything about. When you buy a little cabin cruiser, whatever you got a cabin cruiser, say about 30 feet long, you feel pretty good. You polish your boat and all that. But you also know you'd like to have a lifeboat, rafts on it, you'd like to have a refrigeration system on there, but you can't afford it, so you'd like just to go and watch the other guy go by. But if you just came into another $70,000, you might offer your boat. So what we've got in mind is to turn out a bunch of boats, well built, all kinds. You go out with your friends on a 3-month cruise, but you don't know it. You go wherever the hell you want to go, with the people you select. When you come back, that boat is taken in, taken out of the water, put in key shape, and then another group goes out and uses it. Or you can decide to live on a boat, and then you stay there. But the idea is you don't own anything. I don't really believe that if you own the Pacific Ocean, you can enjoy it anymore. As long as you can go in and walk along the beach, you don't have to own it. And I say that when we put an end to ownership, when you don't own anything but you use everything, just like the library, the Yellowstone National Park, that'll be the beginning of no envy, greed, corruption. No one can do any embezzlement because no one can take anything away from you. You don't own it. You know what I mean? No one can steal anything. Because they live in adequate housing and have good water. The only thing they can do is maybe seduce your wife. As long as the system still has that, you understand what I mean? Those will be the remaining problems which will vanish also later on. But it would take a different way of thinking. The problem generators is due to the way we think about things. Do you have any other questions regarding that? Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, to go back to his question.
You mean who will make the decisions?
Yeah, I think the question itself implies that our conditioning is such that we think a human being, and my God, we know they have failed in their controls and direction of things. So we ask the question related to that. But it seems to me that when you think in terms of future living, it's on a broader level. It's not related to one human being in charge because he knows more than others or whatever. It seems to me it's related to technology, computers, etc., who will make the decisions.
Arrive.
Not me and arrive.
Yeah. But when that happens,
There won't be that human failing, at least there'll be less human failing in the computer.
well, you don't put anything in
And
the
there will
human's
be-
hand, Harry, that can. You don't put anything in the human's hand that can affect the lives of great many people. You don't ever put a machine in charge of an airplane. You put 3 and 4. You know what I mean? Together. When it comes in for landing, it's worked by not 2 units, you see. You build redundancy in the machines and you're all right. If you depend on humans, you got a lot of problems. In other words, if you need some brain surgery and the brain surgeon's wife left him, he's got trouble with his kids, his surgery is affected. I'm sure you know that. So I don't want to rely on human idiosyncrasies, my own or anyone else's. See? We're only subject to that. Humans, they differ from machines at present in that they run differently. Humans look the same, fairly close, but their moods vary. Sometimes they're passionate, sometimes they're not, sometimes they feel happy, sometimes they're sad, and you have to adjust to that. But a machine, if it's well made and you can afford it, you turn the key and it starts. Put on the tape recorder and it plays, assuming you've got good equipment. But humans are not. Put your arm around them on Wednesday, say, take your arm off. So what did I do? Don't you remember? My mother passed away, you didn't take your hand. Whatever the hell. You run into a lot of different things with humans, see. Sometimes a guy's got to take a shit real badly, and he says hello, and he moves off it. He could have at least taken 10 minutes. Human systems are different. So you got to allow for those differences. People have belly aches, headaches, you know. Well, the machines are fairly steady. You say, go in the rain, the machine goes in the rain. Who says, I left my umbrella home? Or whatever it is, they are subject to so many variables that we would like to eventually phase out human systems and use machine systems in the management of social processes. I'm not talking about what you do. You can go to the beach whenever you want to, or run a boat. The only thing the machine will always do is keep turning in. For example, many planes are lost. You know, the triangle ship. They're lost all over. They go into the sea and they sink. Airplanes are pretty well put together. They usually don't come flying apart. So sometimes you fly over, you don't find anything. You ever hear that? Or a submarine went down, a boat went down, they found nothing. And everyone's amazed they found nothing. I'm not amazed, because if you show me an airliner with a cap inserted in the top of it, and whenever water pressure increases, this cap releases, and it floats right up to the top, giving off colored smoke and radio signals, not depending on some asshole sitting up front that goes down, the plane is knocked out, and he can't communicate. The minute this circuit gets wet, an antenna goes up, and it transmits. Do you know what I'm talking about? So all private boats by the state, not the state that you've ever read about, will be equipped with these floating cars that insert in the surface of the wing, many of them, not one. And they transmit, not one, three little transmitters, beep, 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 lights flashing, smoke signals. You understand what I mean? The reason you don't find anything on airplanes is because they don't have anything that's designed to come off. Even the stinking rubber life rafts are inside. And when you pull them off the rack, and you release it, it blows up and blocks everybody from getting out of the plane. It should be built in on the outside of the plane and ejected out with ropes so people can hang on and get off now. Not, all right, get your little life raft. The plane doesn't wait for you to get your life raft on, you know, light a cigar. Right now you launch all that crap. You understand? We don't have that. So I'm not surprised that they couldn't find any part of the plane, because, you know, parts of the plane don't come off. It's pretty well built. And if they do come off, they sink. Okay? Now, even with the Navy, the United States Navy, you talk about insanity. They had a big ship full of all kinds of weapons, bombs and stuff like that. They took it out to sink it. You ever hear about this thing? Big freighter full of shit, poison gas. They took it out in the ocean. There was a lot of military ships around. Then they detonated, and it didn't sink. And then it got lost. And the Navy was looking with this big floating thing with dynamite all over it. And these bastards, it was sunny weather, too. You understand what I mean? And these guys are going to handle a war situation. I'm terrified of the military type thinking. I'm terrified of the airlines. I'm terrified of the whole stinking system, because it does not include all of those things. So the kind of society I'm talking about spends a great deal of time and energy on securing a system so that you don't have to answer to government. Presently you have to answer, fill out paper forms and bullshit. You don't have to answer to anyone so long as you operate in your community and do the best you can. And this is what's about. You meet an obligation that you have to the community. If we all want to install an electric tower to generate power, we all agree to participate to whatever extent we can. That's it. Any other questions? Do you think you know what I mean by not making opinions? I see, like our society says that everyone should have a right, and I don't. And the story I give is, let's say that 3 different girls a day go into your apartment. Maybe you're a music instructor. You know, they always think you're funny. You know what I mean? The point, it could be any number, or it could be that. Or it could be that. You know what I mean? But the point is, I don't know, and that's the real answer. And who the hell is the person that's asking you? What is the person asking that question for? Now, sometimes a person walks over and says, well, I like that guy, but what nationality is he? What nationality is he? Or he comes from Bon Jovi. You've never heard of him. Too bad. Or he comes from Fernando Poo. That's an island off Africa. Fernando Poo. He's a Pooey. He doesn't even know whether to get married or not. Is he a nigger or a Jew? He says, no, he's Fernando Poo. That's Fernando. And the poor guy can't get mad. Now, the point is, why does a person ask that question? When you come in, if you come into a house, you say, if you were to come into a house today, somebody very sick, I say, well, what is it that you want? We're waiting for the doctor. and expect women to be tough. And so people are so mixed up that you have to change the basic way society operates. Any other questions before we go for coffee? Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to say, aren't we living in an age where we tend to put some people way up, some people way down, some people here, some people there. I think I've heard it called the age of the individual. And I believe what you're speaking about is something entirely different than that.
You know, we want to get away from giving more social activity rather than emphasizing individual. Be easy. How's